Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dan Scheiman, Bird Conservation Director for Audubon, Arkansas. Welcome to another installment of Better Know a Birder. A couple of administrative things first. Everybody is on mute. If you have a question for Bill, you can post that in the chat box. If you are on Zoom, watching this live through Facebook, you can post your question in the comment box, and that will be relayed to me to relay to our guest. Also, as we speak, Tropical Storm Cristobal is hitting Little Rock, where Bill and I are, and it doesn't seem to be all that bad. But just in case power goes out and this talk suddenly ends, you'll know why. So our guest today is Bill Holimon, who is the director of Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. During his 19 years with ANHC, he has also been the Avian Ecologist, Grants Coordinator, and Chief of Research. Bill received his bachelor's in biology from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and a master's in biology from New Mexico State University. Previously, he worked for the Nature Conservancy in Texas on golden-cheeked warblers and black-capped vireos, and conducted research on red crossbills throughout North America. With Natural Heritage Commission, Bill is leading efforts to restore healthy populations of the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker in Arkansas. So Bill, thanks for taking time to be with us today and share a bit about you. I wanted to get started with, tell us a bit about how you got into birds. Do you have a spark bird that got you started?
So when I was a kid, my parents started camping when I was just for the third grade. And so we would go camping and we would notice the birds out there. You know, as time goes by, we'd do a little backyard birding, or we'd go driving down country roads looking for bluebirds or blue grosbeaks and those type of things. And so really, and I would sit in the back seat. I'd have my golden guide to birds in the back seat, my binoculars as we drove around. And I was studying and waiting to see a bird and so forth. So really my interest in birds started at a pretty young age. We weren't hardcore birders, but we knew a lot of our, the basic birds like the ones I just mentioned. We'd learn a few bird songs and stuff like that, like the drink your tea of the towhee, now the eastern towhee, Rufus towhee back then. So that's really where a lot of my interest came in, was because we spent a great deal of time camping, and then we'd go for drives out in the country on weekends and stuff like that.
So when did it really take off that you knew you wanted to pursue a career in birds and hence go to grad school for it even?
It was when I decided to go back to school for my second, I started off actually as an accountant. I have an accounting degree as well. And it's a long story how I ended up in that. It wasn't a great match, but it's nice to have those tools, to work with. But
for budgeting, yeah.
yeah, for budgeting and stuff like that. But when I was considering going back to school, and my previous past of liking birds kind of came forth. I was when I started school at University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I initially talked to the mammologist, Gary Hyde. He said, "Oh, you need to go talk to Bill Baltosser, who's the ornithologist at the university there." And we hit it off. He basically was my advisor, and we remained really good friends. But that's really when my deepest interest in birds began, was when I went back for my undergrad in biology.
So besides around Arkansas, where else have you been to go birding? Around the country, around the world?
So I was fortunate that where I did my graduate work, I worked for Craig Binkman, who's the world's expert on red crossbills, a great scientist and a great guy. So I went to school at New Mexico State, but my graduate research was in Southeast Alaska. So that was quite an experience. I was funded by the Forest Service Research Lab in Juneau, Alaska. And so I would drive my vehicle up to Bellingham, Washington, put it on a ferry boat, and about 3 days later, you'd be in Ketchikan, Alaska. And I basically worked throughout the Alexander Archipelago, had several sites, Ketchikan, Prince of Wales Island, Juneau, Haines, Sitka, and so forth, and systematically did surveys through that area looking at Red Crossbills and conifer cones, crops, and so forth, and looking at populations there. And so anyway, so that was a great place to bird. As you can imagine, I saw a lot of great bird species that I never would have seen had I not worked there. After that, I also worked for Craig under an National Science Foundation grant. And that work took me to a number of places, including Newfoundland, Quebec, Montana. I worked separately under another person in Montana, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Colorado, Idaho, and the birding was exceptional in all those locations. I also did some work in Arizona, and I have to say Arizona is probably my favorite place to go birding. The southern part of the state, especially southeast Arizona, is just exceptional. You get a lot of bird species that just make it in, like trogons and so forth, elegant trogons, that just make it into the United States. They use this Madran, I believe it's the Madran mountain system, it's Madran vegetation. You get spectacular birds like the trogon I mentioned, and there's a redstart that's incredible, and the list is long. And then you get into the mountains up on the Colorado Plateau. It's about 8,000 feet, this beautiful ponderosa pine habitat, very open habitat, no poison ivy, no cactus, no biting insects. And you have this real clear view for long periods, and the weather's fantastic, although it can be freezing in the morning. And that, just the combination of all that in a relatively small area, you can see so many things, and it's and the landscape's beautiful as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Southeast Arizona is definitely one of the best birding spots in the country. And also, if you like hummingbirds, that's the place to go as well. So those red crossbills, different populations have different bill sizes and shapes. They tend to work on different species of conifers. They have somewhat different calls. So there's a lot of talk about splitting red crossbills into up to 9 different species. What's your take on that? Are they separate species now? Is it speciation in progress?
Yeah, so a lot of it is probably incipient speciation. Some of it's complete, like the Cassia crossbill in the South Hills of Idaho. I had the pleasure of working on that for the first couple summers that Craig Binkman was working on that. But the crossbills utilize this really specialized niche. They are specialized for removing seeds from closed or reclosed conifer cones. And so you have things that like the hemlock crossbill in southeast Alaska, where the cones are as small as about the end of your thumb, and those cones open in October, but then they get 16 inches of rain in October, and so that moisture recloses them. So that keeps them from releasing all their seeds, and so they'll have this reliable source of seeds through spring and even into early summer when food resources are most limiting. Then you have crossbills that will use cones that the cones don't release their seeds unless there's a fire, and so it melts this waxy coat on the cones, and the cones are open and they'll release their seeds. And with all that, you have these crossbills that are adapting to or have adapted to specific conifer cones to get them through the period when food is most limiting. And each of these cones are different size, and in some cases, even when the cones are similar size, the seeds are different size. And the crossbills are so specialized that they are adapted, their bill depth is adapted to opening a specific conifer cone, and then their seed husking groove width is adapted to cracking open a specific seed. So even though a bird may have the ability to open a cone as well as another, it may not be as quick or as efficient as cracking open the seed to get to the seed shell, I should say, to get to the actual seed. And just to give people an idea of what I'm talking about, you've probably seen cardinals go to your feeder, and then they'll put the black sunflower seeds in their mouth, and they're twirling them around. They twirl them around, and finally they stop. And what happens at that point is they get the seed in that seed husking groove, and then they bite down, and it cracks the seed along the suture there. And then you'll see they'll blow it out, and then they actually get to the nut inside of it, and that's where the food is. And crossbills do that too, but they're just extremely efficient at it. So if that's the cone that they're adapted to, like our western hemlock or ponderosa pine and so forth, then they're like a sewing machine. They can open those things and they're husking, they're getting the seed out, and boom, they're just moving on. They have to be, because that's the main thing they're eating.
Very cool. Thank you. So you're the head of Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. Briefly tell us what ANHC does and describe some of the projects that you've worked on over the years.
Sure. So we're a small state agency, a small natural resource agency. We have 17 full-time people and 5 part-time people currently. In a nutshell, so to speak, our mission is protecting the state's rare plants, animals, and natural communities. And we do that through 2 primary programs, and that is our heritage program, where we collect data on the location of rare species and communities. We use that to assess the status. So it's a dynamic process to where we periodically reassess what is rare and what is not rare. We use that. We provide that data to others like the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy, and so forth in their planning, but we also use it to guide our protection efforts under our natural areas program. So in that program, we directly protect those elements. And we currently have 75 natural areas comprising 69,378 acres. We have 3 acquisitions we're working on now that would get us close to 70,000 acres. We anticipate those being done by the end of June. But our data helps us determine what to protect. And so, there's only so many dollars we're going to get. So we have to be very efficient with it. So our heritage program helps guide our protection and our habitat management. Some of the programs that we've done, so in western Arkansas, we have these cool places, the Cherokee and A.T. Flanagan Prairie. These protect the remnants of what was once massive Cherokee prairies. And I think we currently own collectively around 1,000 acres. The Nature Conservancy also owns a little bit. Tallgrass Prairie, a lot of people probably don't realize, but we do have tallgrass prairie in Arkansas. We once had extensive amounts of it. So we work there to protect that natural community. And with that, we get a lot of grassland birds that are protected as well. Henslow sparrows nest there. Short-eared owls winter there, and so forth. Other things that we're doing in southern Arkansas.
What are you personally working on? Over the years, what projects have you personally been doing in the field?
Well, my biggest one is working on open pine flatwoods, where we're protecting and restoring habitat for open pine species like red-cockaded woodpeckers. And so at Warren Prairie, we're doing a repatriation project that started in October of 2010, when we released 10 birds that were 6 of which were from the Kisatchie National Forest in central Louisiana, and 4 were from Union County of Arkansas. And this was 5 males and 5 females. These are red-cockaded woodpeckers, an endangered species. They're all birds born or fledged earlier that year. And the program has been very successful to date. Our short-term goals get to 10 to 12 breeding groups, and the long-term is to have 30, and breeding groups are pairs basically. But this bird is really interesting in that they often have helpers at the nest, and so you talk about them in groups, as groups. Last 2 years we've had 10 pairs. This year we have 10 pairs again. So we should be nearing our 5-year average of 10 pair, that being a goal. Long term, we hope to have 30 pair, and that's going to require long-term management. We have enough habitat acreage-wise, but a lot of it is in younger pine stands, and that will require, of course, the trees to get older and to be managed to get in this open habitat structure that these species require. And they require a park-like habitat structure, and they require older trees, generally at least 60, but generally often 80 years or older, because they make cavities, they excavate cavities in live pine trees. And of course you have sap that comes out, so it's called pitch because it pitches out the beetles and so forth, but it'll also pitch out the birds. But that wood is also very, very hard, and their bill is made out of similar materials as our fingernails. Their bills are about as long as my thumbnail is wide and so forth. And it takes quite a while to get that material out. And these older trees have a higher frequency of red heart fungus. And once they get to that, then they can start getting chunks out instead of just sawdust. And it generally takes, even in these best conditions where you have large trees with red heart fungus, it still takes them 2 to 4 years to finish a cavity. So a very limiting resource. And because of that, that is one of the reasons that they have helpers at the nest, because while there's plenty of resources for feeding on, there's a scarcity of resources for roosting and nesting. So the male's offspring often will stick around waiting for an adjacent group of cavities to become available, or their dad's not going to live forever, so they can take over that cavity when that happens. If that does happen and they take over that, then the mom will take off.
Sure.
And so that's kind of an inbreeding avoidance mechanism there.
So all across the red-cockaded woodpecker's range, a lot of state agencies, federal agencies, and even timber companies are working to try to reach that species populations. How do you feel about the future of red-cockaded woodpeckers? Are you hopeful for them?
Very hopeful. There's been an incredible recovery of this species so far. We've come a very long ways. A lot has been learned. There are well over 1,000 papers, scientific papers on this, and we really know how to do this now. But it does take time. If you do the work, they will show up, but it's slow. It's not one of these, that you put in the habitat and all of a sudden you've got 10 more pair. They generally only nest once a year. We've never had any groups nest twice. It's just really unusual. And they generally fledge 2 birds a pair. So population growth is slow, but it's steady. And if you just keep doing the work, you will get the results. But population numbers are dramatically higher than they were. Populations are much better off, but the work is not complete. So we do need another 20, 30, 40 years, and hopefully it's only 20, 30, but there's work left to be done.
So you better train the next red-cockaded woodpecker special Heritage Commission before you retire.
That's right.
Well, also, I should mention, full disclosure, my wife, Samantha, works for Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission.
She does.
For you any softball questions or anything.
Okay.
Someone wants to know if you have more information about the woodpeckers and the work you do on the woodpeckers on your website.
Yep, we've done several e-newsletter articles that you can find those if you go to our naturalheritage.com. Ruthie Berryhill does that with input from Leslie Petrick, and they do great work. We also have a great Facebook site, and they've done another number of articles. You could probably find some there as well. But there's some really good articles on there, and we update that after the nest season every year.
So what's your favorite natural area and why?
Well, I mean, it has to be Warren Prairie Natural Area, but it is close. So Warren Prairie Natural Area is where we're doing a lot of work, and the Red-cockaded Woodpecker is part of it, but there's a lot of diversity at this site. So it's called Warren Prairie. So you wouldn't think a woodpecker would be at a prairie site, but it's the prairies. It's called that because there are these open grassland areas there. They're actually a type of grassland called a barrens, and some people actually call it a glade as well. And these are anywhere from like an acre to, we have a few that are maybe 4 or 5 acre openings. And within these grassland areas, we have a wintering bird called the Henslow sparrow. And that's actually what I first started working on at Warren Prairie. Really like Henslow sparrows a lot. They're a bird that really prefers to run around through the grass. They're hesitant to fly. So when you want to go see one, you generally get a group of people to go with you. You go to these open areas, you spread out 10 feet apart, and you start walking through the barrens, and you will flush the bird. They're not real strong flyers, so they'll fly a little way and they'll drop to the ground, and you repeat that until they perch on a shrub or some blue stem or something like that. And they typically, once you do that, they'll stick there and you'll get great looks. And this grassland birds have really been hammered. This is a species of high conservation concern, and also a very interesting looking bird. It has a olive colored head, so very unusual colored, and there's this really intricate, pretty streaking in it, kind of chestnut and other colors. Really, really pretty bird. A lot of people haven't seen them. They are kind of difficult to find, but this is Warren Prairie is a reliable place to see them in the wintertime. And in fact, a group from Connecticut Audubon comes down to Arkansas every year. This is ecotourism, and one of the places they go is Warren Prairie Natural Area, and it's just to see the Henslow sparrows.
So besides Warren Prairie, and of course the Cherokee Prairies, which are beautiful this time of year, what other natural areas would you recommend birders visit?
In central Arkansas, Lawrence Creek, I believe is actually how we've mispronounced it for years apparently. But
I did not know that.
Yeah, it is a fantastic place for birding year round, but especially during migration. Long list of species there. I like Baker Prairie Natural Area in North Arkansas as well. It's a very small site, but it has some nice grassland birds, and it's a spectacular prairie, especially in some years. The spring bloom can just be unbelievable. Let's see, Turnmore Natural Area in southwestern Arkansas, which is another prairie site. And I keep naming prairies, and when in my first few years, one of the things we did is we kind of each were assigned certain areas to go to just have a presence, so to speak. We had smaller staff, and I selected I selected 4 prairie sites and Pine City Natural Area in eastern Arkansas, which is also a great place to go birding. It's also fairly small, a little over 1,000 acres. But that's the only known location supporting red-cockaded woodpeckers anywhere within the Mississippi alluvial plain. And in the springtime, there are a lot of migrants there, and the birding can be very good.
So if you could bird anywhere in the world that you haven't been to, what's your top destination and why?
One of the places I want to go to eventually is Maine. I've been to Maine, but just for a different reason. There is an excursion you can go to and go out. It's a boat trip. I think it's like 25 minutes, and you can go out and see the Atlantic puffins. And I've seen the 2 Pacific puffins, but I haven't seen the Atlantic puffins. But on these also, you can go to these places. They have these blinds, and you can sit behind the blinds, and the puffins can't see you, and they're just on the other side of you, and they're nesting. So that sounds really incredible. So I would like to do that. And I would also like to go, I've been on one pelagic trip going off the coast of southern Washington. I would like to go on a pelagic trip out of California. And there are a number of great sites there to go, but California would be a good spot to go for a pelagic trip.
Yeah, earlier this month I was supposed to be in Newfoundland, and that trip has been postponed. So I was supposed to be seeing puffins, but oh well.
Yeah.
Maybe this fall.
Well, yeah, you can still get them there in the fall. I know when I was working in Newfoundland in early September, the year I was there, they had a late nesting year, and I ran into some folks that said there were a few of them still nesting on the cliff sides then. So
Cool. Well, I hope I've seen them before, but Samantha hasn't. So
yeah,
up there.
there you go.
Again, a reminder to everybody: if you have questions for Bill, you can post those in the chat box or in the comment box on Facebook. So, Bill, you've been birding for a long time. What advice do you have for beginning birders?
So I think, well, there's a lot of different things you can do, but when I teach birding classes, I always start off with the process. How do you learn how to bird, basically? Bird identification. And fortunately, these days there are a lot of resources that you can just have on your phone. There are a lot of great apps, and the apps will show you the different birds, but a lot of them also have within them, they'll have little tools that teach you how to identify birds. And a lot of those things are, there's the different geography or whatever of the bird. There's, what are you looking for when you see a bird? The eyebrow, the wing bars, and so forth. And so learning all of those things. And then, when you look at a bird, knowing what size-wise, relative size. So when you're looking at, was that the size of a pigeon, or is that the size of a robin, or is that the size of a hawk, and those type of things. So knowing those things really well. And of course, learning bird songs is really a great tool. And people are often intimidated by that at getting started, but I like to remind people that most people actually know some bird songs. Most people don't know what a cardinal sounds like, or a mockingbird, or a crow, or a blue jay. So, you've got a little bit of foundation. So, and a lot of times also learning really these common birds first. Everybody wants to learn the hard birds, but learning these common birds, because when migration starts and birds are coming through, if you hear something you don't know, you already know what all the common birds are. You hear something you don't know, it's like, hey, I need to chase that. I want to know what that is. And then when you do, then you learn something about that bird. So those are a little bit of basics, but yeah.
So since you've been working from home, like many of us, you've had a chance to watch the birds in your yard lately. Have you seen any good yard birds? Added any new birds to your yard list in the last couple of months?
We haven't added any new ones. We had a couple of really neat things happen. We had Carolina wrens nest on our porch, and we had Carolina chickadees nest in a nest box that we have out in the front yard. So I guess we have Carolina on our minds, but both of them were successful, which was really cool. And we still see a chickadee family coming around now and then. They fledged quite a while ago, as did the wrens. We're hoping they nest again. I forgot. The other thing we had a scarlet tanager at our bird bath, a male, which was spectacular. There are plenty of places you can see those at Arkansas, but I think that's only the second time we've had one in our yard. So that was fantastic. It appears we may have some Mississippi kites nesting down the street. I haven't found the nest yet, but there's been plenty of behavior that would suggest that they are nesting close by. We had a pair of great horned owls close by. Of course, that was before COVID really got going, but it's kind of at the start of it. I think they were nesting close by. We got a lot of our typical migrant birds, chestnut-sided warblers, redstarts, those type of things. But I don't think we got any new ones. We have a lake right across the street from us. We live in Broadmoor, an older neighborhood, so we have really mature trees, which is great for migration. And we have these huge shortleaf pines, and across the street, behind the house across the street, is a 10-acre lake. And so we get some neat birds there as well. We've had some good birds we've seen from our living room. One year we had a canvasback we could see from the living room, which was pretty. That's
a good yard bird.
Yeah, that's a good yard bird. We get eastern kingbirds that nest around the lake, and peewees, and we have phoebes. And during migration, we get quite a few Baltimore orioles and so forth. Pine warblers nest in the areas. We have brown-headed nuthatches year-round, which are fun. We had some yesterday. So the birdie's pretty good. Although once we get into the heat, this time of year, the migrants are done, and it's your pine warblers and mockingbirds and brown thrasher, stuff like that. But you're still really good birds.
Yeah, I just saw a brown thrasher fledgling in my yard this morning.
That's a fun bird.
Yeah. So also, when you are at work, your headquarters overlooks the Arkansas River, and I know you and Samantha go birding along the river on a regular basis. What are some of the good birds you've seen along the river there by your office?
Yeah, it's fun because, again, it's a great migratory pathway, and you get a lot of stuff that stops along the river. We had one day we had a Buick's wren. That was quite a bit of fun. We've had one day we had 2 willow flycatchers, which was pretty exceptional. Samantha's really good at spotting bald eagles, and she sees bald eagles left and right out there, seems like. And even from her office, she'll say, "Oh, there goes a bald eagle." There are a lot of we saw a northern water thrush one day down there, which was quite a bit of fun. We weren't expecting to see that along a pathway inside the downtown area. So quite a few good birds. Those are ones that come to mind. We have, I believe, over 130 species that we've observed from there. Close by along the path, there's a area where western kingbirds nest, and we've watched them fledge. I think 3 birds each of the last 2 years, and maybe some but the year before. I can't remember. So I do miss that because I haven't been able to determine if they nested this year. So hopefully they did.
Well, they seem to be on the rise over by the Little Rock Port Authority. I saw a lot of them during the Bird LR Birdathon. Also, you've had Inca doves by the river too, by your building.
Yeah, we did see Inca doves one day as well. And I should also mention what's really cool about the western kingbirds. We have eastern kingbirds that nest right, 150, 200 feet away. And, the last year they were both successful. And no major fighting between them. And so that's kind of interesting. We occasionally get citrus-tail flycatchers, but they're usually just moving through. But yeah.
Someone wants to know if you've seen any effects of pine beetles in your area, and what's a strategy to address pine beetle problem?
We had a couple years where we had really bad summer droughts at some of these open pine areas, and we had outbreaks of Ips beetles, but they kind of resolve themselves. We have not had any issues with pine beetles. Southern pine beetles, and those are obviously very bad news. When those do occur, as soon as you see the trees that have them, you should cut those trees down, or at least that's the strategy. And there's a certain radius around that. I don't recall exactly what that is, but you want to cut the number of trees down around that. Our areas that we manage for red-cockaded woodpeckers and for this open pine ecosystem has much greater spacing between trees, which reduces the likelihood of a bad impact from southern pine beetles. A lot of the areas where you have high density of trees, it can really take off like a wildfire.
So one last question for you, and I think I know the answer, but I'm not sure. What's your favorite bird and why?
Well, it's a red crossbill. Yeah, red crossbills. And second would be red-cockaded woodpeckers.
Right, that was my 2 choices. It was a toss between those 2.
And then Henslow sparrows right behind it. But those first 2, they're both specialized birds, and we know a lot about their ecology, which makes them really interesting. The other thing is they're both very social. So red crossbills occur in flocks, and then red-cockaded woodpeckers occur in family groups. So they're very social birds, and each one of them tends to, at least seems to have a little different personality, which to me is a lot of fun. And so for example, when you go out to do a roost check, some of the birds, you're waiting for birds to come in so you can see how many birds are in a cluster. You can read the color bands on them, determine who they are, how they are, and where they were born, and so forth. And say you have 3 birds in a cluster, sometimes one will come in and go straight into its cavity, The other will come in, it won't go in forever. And then the other one's just doing all kinds of bark flaking and working on sap wells. And each time you go out, you'll seem to see this same pattern with those three birds. And Red Crossbills are similar. They each seem to have their own personality. And so I really like that about them. And Crossbills, another thing, they can be somewhat tame. So I kind of like that. So you can, in a way, get a little closer to them. But those are my favorite birds.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thanks for sharing with everybody. Thanks for your time. It was good to see everybody again, and tune in tomorrow for our next installment where I'll be talking with Sandy Berger. So good bird, everyone. Stay dry.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bill. Bye.
Bye-bye.